and I am recording this session so we can save it for our 320 class as well as the Sustainability Studies blog. I'd like to introduce our guest speaker today, Yessenia Balcazar, who is a 2018 alum of Roosevelt, where she studied sustainability studies. And the title of her talk today is Community Empowerment and Urban Planning in the Era of Social Justice Fatigue. That's quite a title. Community Empowerment and Urban Planning in an Era of Social Justice Fatigue. Yessenia is going to talk for a while. She's got some slides, and then afterward, I hope we can have a nice Q&A session and just have some discussion about some of the issues and points she raises. During her time at Roosevelt, as an undergrad student, Yessenia was very active in a variety of capacities. Just in her first year, she participated in the fall 2014 planning sessions, as did many other students and alumni and faculty, for Roosevelt's first and still only Sustainability Strategic Plan. After that, following that, she was a member of the inaugural Sustainability 390 Sustainable Campus class that did the ground level research for our first comprehensive STARS campus sustainability assessment. And that was a huge undertaking. So couple of big deal things, and it was all in her first year at Roosevelt. She was a member of the student environmental organization, Are You Green? And in her junior year became its president, stepping up to do some leadership here at the university. Among their many projects under her leadership term in Are You Green was researching and advocating for Roosevelt to become a fair trade university. In 2017, she became Roosevelt's first student intern with the grassroots organization, the Southeast Environmental Task Force. And she continued that work after she graduated on the front lines of the environmental justice movement on Chicago's far south side as CTEF's Bryant Williams Fellow. She'll probably have more to say about that environmental justice work in a short while here. Then in 2019, she earned a very nice scholarship to attend UIC's Master of Urban Planning and Policy program. That scholarship might have a fancy name, I'm not sure, I couldn't remember, but she just graduated from that, earning her master's in urban planning and policy this past May of 2021. While at UIC, she worked as a teaching assistant in the program, and she is finishing up an internship at the Chicago Department of Aviation while pursuing environmental justice advocacy in her home community on Chicago's East Side. We are very proud to welcome Yessenia back to Roosevelt, and I think I speak for all of us when we look forward to her presentation on her community-based work and urban planning experiences and aspirations. That was fun to read, and that was a lot of stuff. I am going to mute and turn the floor over to our special guest speaker, Yessenia Balcazar.
Hi, everyone. Hello. So exciting to be here today. Thank you, Mike, so much for that glowing introduction. It's so weird hearing your sort of resume of things being read to you. But I took this course, oh my God, I think in 2016. And so to be here getting to give a lecture is just insane. I can hardly wrap my head around it, but we're gonna go ahead and get started. As Mike said, our topics for today are gonna cover community empowerment, urban planning, and what these things look like in an era of social justice fatigue. And this talk is going to be very much based off of my own personal experiences in terms of my academic career and sort of the beginnings of my career and taking that interest in urban planning, entering UIC's program and all that jazz, because all those experiences of mine are very much intertwined with these topics. So let's get into it. A little bit of background, although I think Mike covered it very nicely. I recently graduated from UIC's Master of Urban Planning program this past May. In this program, I specialized in environmental planning and policy, but alongside this, maybe even almost more important or prevalent to my experiences, you'll see through this lecture, I took a lot of community development planning courses alongside this. And so I think that's really gonna shine through in my talk today. You'll notice that very well. And of course, I received my Bachelor of Arts in Sustainability Studies from Roosevelt in 2018. During my time in which my last semester, where I became specifically interested in urban planning through Dr. Stephanie Farmer's Urban Issues course. Some of you may know her, may not. While I was there, she was a professor in the sociology department, but it was really her course that I took in my last semester that really spurred my interest in planning. And I remember so well still, you know, scheduling a meeting with her and telling her, like, I think I want to be a planner. Like, what is that going to take, you know? And I was so ready to graduate, so ready to be done with school. I had no intention of going to getting a master's degree at all, but when she told me that's what it was going to take, I was like, okay, like, we'll bite the bullet, like, I'm for it. We'll take that chance. And so it's a little bit about my educational background and some segue into what brought my interest into urban planning in the first place. But coupled with that, I think, but really what's so important in this sort of academic journey, career journey of mine, whatever you want to call it, is where I'm from. That also greatly impacts, you know, where my passions stem from, and that is the East Side of Chicago, the East Side neighborhood. Born and raised, still a resident of the Southeast Side today. We are located in the very, very, very far southeast side of the city, about 13 miles southeast of downtown, and a few blocks away from the border of Hammond, Indiana. So many of my friends that I made at Roosevelt often teased me and would say that I wasn't actually from Chicago. They'd say, no, you're actually from Indiana. Like, and I'm like, no, we're still in the city's boundaries. Like, I promise you, I'm from Chicago. We're here. We exist. But yeah, so the East Side is, just to give a little bit of background on it for those that don't know, because I think we're so, I don't know if underrepresented would be the right word to say in the city, but you know, I think that we're not as well known as we should be, and so we're accessible only through bridges, because we're surrounded by a bunch of waterways, like Calumet and the Calumet River, which are very, very important to our community. And I want to talk a little bit about sort of the community's history and its impacts on the rest of the city. So historically, we're known as Steel City, the East Side, because we housed much of the city's steel mills. This was started around like the late 1930s, and they all closed down in the late 1980s. But some of the most prominent sites I have shown here are Acme Steel and LTV Steel. And the sort of mark that these left on the East Side just it's left a legacy. In good ways, in bad ways. I think a lot of people in our community look back on it fondly, in the sense that while the steel mills were open, everyone had a job. And, you know, the breadwinner of like every East Side family during that time worked in the steel mills. And so a shortage of jobs was not an issue at the time. However, after their closing, they've left a legacy of pollution and brownfield sites in our community, and it's really hindered our community vitality. It's made it so that many businesses and establishments do not want to come to the east side. It's made it very difficult for us to revitalize and sort of find a new path or a new thing that we're known for, right? It's left us a little bit lost, and so that is unfortunate, but it is a reality, and it all is going to coincide with planning. So one thing that did sort of come after the steel mills, or what was always there, was the Calumet Industrial Corridor, but really became sort of our economy's namesake, or sort of what it was dependent on. This is then where, you know, the industry in our community was where people then would seek out jobs once the steel mills closed down. But it was very difficult. The employment rates for residents that live in the southeast side that are actually employed by this industry is very slim, slim to none. The Ford plant on Torrance Avenue employs the most of our residents, and that is only 1 to 5% employment rate that they do employ for those that live in the east side. And so that's not a lot by any means. And so as I mentioned, you know, at the very least, when we had the steel mills, we had employment, and now we just don't have much of that anymore. And unfortunately, what comes with this industry, much like what the steel mills left, is more pollution and more reluctance for other companies, you know, to want to come to our community, and again, just kind of following this sad narrative of it being difficult to revitalize, difficult for the community to get new residents to flourish after this fact. Here are some images I have of what the industrial corridor looks like, just so you can get a better picture. So there's a multitude of industries that are located in our community along the waterways. Primarily scrap metal is one of the biggest industries that we have over here, along with salt, crumb rubber, granite, just a lot of different sort of materials that, you know, many places are dependent on, many companies are reliant on. What a lot of us say over here, you know, is that it's unfair to think that our community is responsible for building up so much of the city and so much of beautiful downtown, and yet it seems as though that sort of investment is never poured back into us, and that's sadly been like the long-term narrative. But so this is important to my sort of own personal experiences in wanting to pursue planning, because then it brings the question, okay, well then how do we change this, right? If we've been lost for some time, we're kind of trying to find a new path to revitalize something different that we're known for. How do we change this narrative? And so through Dr. Farmer's Urban Issues course, that's where I learned that these sort of things arise through planning. It all starts with the plan. Nothing is unintentional. There's always like this set direction for every community and every city. And, you know, for us, that's utility. And while that is very beneficial to the rest of the city. It's not beneficial to us. And so I was very, intrigued with how I can make it so that, that's just not all that we're known for, or so that the public health of our residents can be protected, so that we can have safe jobs, bring in new companies. I was just so enthralled in how this could be done. And so just some more images of the east side here, because I do want to highlight some of the positive points we bring, right? Because while I was so intrigued in getting, to bring new vitality to the community, you get this sort of, or I got this sort of passion by seeing the potential that my community has, right? And so a big component of that is just the sense of community in the first place, the relationships that we have, the love that East Side residents have for the East Side, our green spaces. We have so much green space, which is incredible, considering, all the different industry that we're polluted by. It's sort of like this, it's always provided this solace. And I know I'm not just speaking for myself when I say that, but for so many of the residents here, for so many of the organizers that I've gotten to meet through my work, there are really like our gems that we want to capitalize, is the worst word, because we don't want to glorify capitalism, but we wanted to expound on these things, right? These things that can be just so much greater and not, threatened by this local industry, because they often are, and they deter visitors because there's odors, because there's pollution, because people feel like, well, maybe these green spaces are also contaminated because of these adjacent companies, and that's just not what we want, right? So, but I'm here, and I'm culminating sort of all these passions and these ideas. And I went to Dr. Bryson, because I needed a internship for my last semester as well. And I told him, I'm not sure what kind of direction to take all this. I'm very passionate about environmental justice, my community, et cetera, et cetera. And he pointed me in the direction of the Southeast Environmental Task Force. And SETF, my acronym, is located in Hegewisch, which is our next door neighbor. And they also make up a huge chunk of the 10th ward. And of course are also burdened by the same industry, the same companies, right? We're in the same boat. And so the Southeast Environmental Task Force, they were initiated by Marion Burns, and I believe it was the early 1980s. And she saw, a lot of the same issues that I was discussing, right? She saw the environmental injustice, and so she set out to create an organization meant to combat these issues and meant to protect the green spaces, because that was sort of her thing, right? She was very, very protective of the green spaces, especially. But while I was interning here, I was working under Executive Director Peggy Salazar, who she actually recently just retired this year. But during her sort of presidency of this organization, we led a multitude of different projects, right, or initiatives, primarily trying to kick out different companies in our community, or trying to prevent companies from coming in to the community, right? So if it wasn't one thing, it was always another. If we had just stopped one, or we were not victorious in stopping one that had just come in, it was always the announcement of another. And this is where community empowerment is vital, because it's very, it brings you down, right? When you're sort of hit back to back with these sorts of things, you know, and it feels like a nonstop fight. But yet we keep pushing. Look, the image on the top right that I have is probably one of our most notable wins. Maybe some of you have heard of, but it was when SETF formed the coalition to ban pet coke, and pet coke is shorthand for petroleum coke, and it's a byproduct of the oil refining process. And we had oil refineries here in the southeast side, but this byproduct, they would store it along the riverbanks in just enormous piles, right near residential areas. It's sort of like piles of soot is almost like the what pet coke looks like, right? And you know, we've thought nothing of it for a long time. You know, these big black piles, it was just customary to see, you know, the sorts of products piled up that these companies would store along our riverbanks. It was customary, but when it got to be too much, it was known. You know, houses were having to be power washed once a month because the wind would pick up this pet coke and blow it on to every surface, and it was very damaging to respiratory health. And that was the big issue, right? We have one of the highest rates of asthma in the entire city, and we knew that pet coke was one of the big players of that. And so it led to years of protest and press conferences and lawsuits. And in 2015, we won against the companies that were storing pet coke along our riverbanks, and they had to remove it. And those piles are thankfully gone now. But as I said, it's one thing after another, right? After one big victory, you're just left fighting another thing. I remember one of the things we fought while I was interning there was a proposed confined disposal facility by the Army Corps of Engineers, and that was another battle. And but it's constant, right? And I want to segue this into one of our most famous ones, recent, that I'm sure, I hope most of you in this room know of, which is the Stop General Iron campaign. So this, oh man, is just, I think, one of the best examples of community empowerment specifically that I can think of. You know, and is following graduation, I remember so well, it was that summer of 2018, we caught wind that scrap metal facility, General Iron, located in Lincoln Park, was planning to relocate over to the southeast side, right across from our high school, George Washington High School, elementary school, our park, one of our largest parks, Rowan Park. Just devastating news to receive at the time, you know. And while in 2018 it was almost perceived as like a rumor, it was supposed to be part of Mayor Rahm Emanuel's river modernization or industrial corridor modernization plan, because he was trying to really revitalize the North Branch corridor. And part of that plan was to give General Iron the boot. But of course, their revitalization comes at our expense. And that we knew, even though it seemed to be just this like, okay, well, it's not a done deal. It's, you know, it's just talks about it. But we know, like, no, we need to start fighting now, though. Anyway, if we're going to prevent this from happening, even if it's just rumored or what have you, we need to start now. And that's how a lot of these battles go, because even if you hear something that's just a plan, or maybe it might happen or it won't, unfortunately, what we're accustomed to in the East Side is that reality that, like, no, that's probably going to happen, because where do these companies always go? They always come to us. That's what we're used to. We're aware of that. And so in 2018, we started holding a series of press conferences and protests on site of the facility. And it was definitely a slow kind of upheaval, I guess you could say. It was hard to gain traction. We're trying to outreach as much as we can, inform residents, and it was difficult. It was difficult to get people on board up until 2020, when it just, I mean, it almost felt like magical, right? This sort of surge of people that suddenly wanted to promote civic advocacy, or wanted to be a part of that now. And of course, that was because in 2020, we saw, so much civic unrest, and it, like, this surge of activism again, right? And so all of a sudden we had people wanting to join this campaign, Stop General Iron. And so much of that was comprised of youth. And you can see here in the images too, right? Clearly you see a lot of youth in these pictures on the front lines. And it was a lot of hard work. So many petitions. I mean, so many visits to City Hall, so many letters to Lightfoot, to Dr. Awardi from the Department of Public Health. And it does bring about a lot of fatigue, to feel like you're just, making all these moves, but you're not being heard, you're not being acknowledged. And so a few of the activists, really took drastic measures in starting a hunger strike. And that hunger strike lasted 30 days, and it blew up. And that's why I say I hope that most of you know of this campaign, because the way that it caught on was just amazing. And it was truly one of the moments that I saw this community unify in a way that I hadn't seen before, since 2018, doing this work and being a part of, environmental justice advocacy in my community. This was like truly like nothing I had seen in my experience, and that, my boss Peggy and a lot of our older volunteers hadn't seen before, especially because it was such a youth dominated campaign. It was just very refreshing. And I think, unfortunately, though, just thinking that it has to come to a hunger strike where we are worrying about the health of our community members that took that plunge. And it was scary. And it was. And I would watch, their daily Instagram health check-ins and things like that. But eventually it got the message across, right? And the permit was denied. And so, again, just amazing, right? The importance of community empowerment, and the importance of fighting through that fatigue, because it happens. But if you let it, just kind of stop the progress, then you're not going to see that outcome that you want. And so leaning on, your community, on your people. Empowering each other is so important, and you can see that here through this campaign, right? Clear as day. But tying it all back together is, okay, well, what does this have to do with planning then, right? I know a lot of you in this course are, for the most part, still working on the foundations of planning, or, you know, Dr. Bryson told me is that he's still working on covering. And so you still haven't yet been introduced to this sort of concept of community and regional planning, right? That, of course, ties into community empowerment and a lot of the courses that I took during my time in the master's program, but it's all connected. You know, thinking about the industrial corridor at the beginning of the lecture and how we were set out, right, in the beginning because of plans to serve as a neighborhood for utility, for industrial purposes. Our zoning reflects that, right? Much of our zoning is PMD6, which is Planned Manufacturing District. And it's so hard to undo zoning, and it's intentional, right? Is basically what I'm getting at. And it's very much political as well. Planning is very, very political. And so tackling that at the community level is so vital for that reason, because you can't always rely on the powers that be, right? Or the stakeholders that are above you, quote unquote. They're never really above us though, let's be real. But that's why it's so important. Because these plans are very old, right? Planning derives from very traditional plans, and the ramifications of that are felt for a long time to come after that. And so having people enter this field that are very interested in changing that and making it so that you know, communities marginalized, disinvested, are prioritized and are seen as having greater value than what they have been in the past, and their residents, their people, as having greater value than what they've been acknowledged to have, because we're people, right? We don't, no one deserves to live in those sorts of conditions, to be forced to live near side all this pollution, to have these public health impacts. And it needs to change, and it needs to change with planning, because that's where it starts. And yeah, so that's where I would like to leave this talk. And I have some contact information up here. I answer my Gmail emails the most, but I do still use my Roosevelt email as well, if you would like to find me on there. And I would like to open up the floor to questions now, if y'all have any. So, thank you so much.
Can you hear me?
Thank you, Yessenia. Let's everybody give her a hand for a terrific presentation. I'm taking note as well of your impeccable timing, as always, beautifully done. And the floor is definitely open to the group for comments and questions on anything Yessenia covered in her talk.
Is my microphone working? Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes. Okay. All right. I just wasn't sure.
Or Andy, go ahead, Andy.
I was curious, Yessenia, you mentioned the zoning and just what can be involved in trying to effectuate change in that area. And I wasn't sure if you had the opportunity to look more deeply into that, and then maybe you could expound on that a little further?
Yeah, absolutely. So zoning is probably one of the most difficult aspects of planning to change. I think simply through activism, right? Because zoning is one of the most political components of it. You have commissioners, a zoning commissioning team that's in charge of instating those things, and it is possible to appeal zoning. There's special case zonings and modifications and things of that nature. But I would also very much attribute that to the political process and the larger scale plans that go in for implementation, right? I mentioned Mayor Rahm Emanuel's former industrial corridor modernization plan. And when that was brought into effect, his priority was really to modernize the north corridors. And one of those is the Kinsey corridor. And so something that I think the city tried very hard to keep under wraps was that they actually modified the zoning for the Kinsey corridor. They downsized the planned manufacturing district zoning. And of course, that wasn't done through any form of activism or for requests by the public, but rather because that was part of the city's plans, right? More so specifically the mayor's. And he has that connection to the zoning commission. They're able to make those sorts of changes. So it's possible, but it's very hard.
Was it something that you have to like file a lawsuit or something? Like, because you were saying like activism, right? But you're ultimately, what I'm receiving from what you're saying is like activism is going to maybe get you a soundbite, but probably not get you to the finish line, so to speak, right? And so like, is it right? So you're mentioning like the zoning commission and then the oligarchy, so to speak, being able to do that behind closed doors. But so like, let's say you and I, we want to create some business in the east side, and then we want to do one that it's not zoned for. For us to do that, would we then have to like file a lawsuit in order to get it changed? Like, that's kind of just what I'm trying to think about the what do you want to say, like the future hurdles that we're going to continue. Like I hear everything you're saying about trying to revitalize this community and shift it from what it used to be, and it has these incredible green spaces and there's so much opportunity. But then again, it's this like level of bureaucracy. And it seems like in so much of what we discuss in our majors, right? Like sharing the same major, so much of it seems like we have to have this legal trainer. Like, I almost feel like I'm like, do I need to go to law school after this? You know what I mean? Like, so I just, your perspective on that's really helpful.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate your insight on that. I feel those sentiments definitely. It's frustrating. Kind of going through it the legal route. It's a method for sure. But I think one of the interesting things that I did want to point out that you mentioned is activism can get you certain things, but not get you to that finish line, which I think it absolutely can get you to that finish line, right? Maybe not necessarily through means of, oh, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change the zoning. Well, not necessarily, right? But it's happened, and it's possible to change the narrative, to say that we no longer welcome this industry, to bring about new local businesses, to change the face of the community so that the response is, oh, there is potential here. And I guess those higher levels of bureaucracy, do see that, and they similar, to the North Branch say, okay, well, then that's not happening here anymore then, right? Or we need to downsize, the PMD because there's potential, right? I think it's about getting them to see that. But for sure we can reach that finish line, just, definitely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can I go next?
Please do, Kareem.
Hello. Again, I want to say congratulations on your great success and great, sorry, I kind of read through your profile. I always say it takes one. From my other sustainability class 350, you know, it kind of brings me back to the Eden place, right? Just one person makes a big difference and everything. So my question to you, with Chicago being like low income and minority city, you know, we have all these dangerous industrial things already happening. What is the biggest challenge that you have come across while trying to achieve your goal? And with that said, with your team, from then to now, how much of an impact, if you had to kind of reach the impact that you have made on the city, what would you, where would you rate yourself? And do you see a light at the end of the tunnel? And how long do you kind of see that happening in the future?
So to clarify, you mean as a community, the way that we have impacted the city as a
Correct.
whole? Okay,
Correct, yes.
gotcha. Yes, absolutely. Ooh, how would I rate that? I have definitely seen an increase, I think from when I started to now. And I think a big part of that absolutely comes from this Stop General Iron campaign that really took like full force speed last year. I think that it's absolutely, you know, our efforts in terms of impact have absolutely motivated other communities, you know, that look like ours. We had one of our hunger strikers even came from Pilsen, and he wasn't from the Southeast side because he was able to see in advance, like, if it doesn't go to the Southeast side, it'll probably come to Pilsen, or it'll probably go to Little Village. It'll go elsewhere, right? So I'm going to take initiative now, and I'm going to speak for my own community while I'm speaking for the Southeast side. And I think even our efforts gave this new spark of motivation to Little Village Hilco campaign, which maybe some of you have heard of, but the coal plant that they spent many years trying to shut down, their alderman had recently approved a new industrial company, Hilco, to take that space. And I never want to say that an organization has lost a battle, right? But it seemed like they had a couple of years ago. I remember we were fighting really hard alongside them, you know, for our brother, sister neighborhoods that look a lot like us. But that, I noticed, has sort of taken new life, that campaign, after the general iron permit was denied, right? And so seeing other communities that look like yours kind of have these victories really ignites something new in these other neighborhoods. And so I think that's where a lot of our impact, or that I've seen as of right now, kind of takes form as is sort of this like igniting spark, and really inspiring other communities, you know, to really embrace the power that they have, and to come together for what they want to see, right, happen in their communities. So that's the answer, I guess, your first question. And then you had a follow-up as well.
Yeah, my thing was, you know, do you see a light at the end of the tunnel? Yeah, you're working, and do you see it? You know, some things you're just like, you're kind of getting wary at it, and it's like, oh my God, there's no light at the end of the tunnel. Do you project or foresee, like, if we hit this strongly for the next year, we'll, you know, definitely cover half of the city, or, you know, for the next 10 years, if we get this amount of people, we'll definitely be done? Where do you see it going moving forward?
Yeah, I think I do see a light at the end of the tunnel. I think it's a long tunnel. I'll say that, but it's absolutely there. I think even in just my own experience going through the urban planning program at UIC, and seeing like the way the courses are taught and how so many of the professors are even, reinforcing this new way to think about planning, right? In all its different sectors, whether it be economic, spatial, environmental, etc. That the goal to change the trajectory is absolutely there. And civic responsibility is a theme that's been so prevalent in all the courses that I took while I was there, and in conversations I've had, with students that were specializing in economic planning and so forth. It's come through in all of that. And a lot of the courses also like challenged the different plans that were very famous back in the day, right? The Burnham Plan, the City Beautiful idea, these sorts of concepts that are just very exclusionary. At the end of the day, it's planning for the affluent and not planning for all, right? Which is what it should be. And so that's where I sort of see the light at the end of the tunnel coming from, is because the way that it's changing at its core and the way that we think about planning and prioritizing different communities over others is changing. I think we're in it for the long haul, but I'm definitely positive about what the outcome will be.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yessenia, I'm curious about how you talked about how your General Iron campaign was built with youthful people, we'll call it that, younger generation. How do you keep that rolling, first of all, but then also get the buy-in from not that youth group that's probably more pessimistic after years and years and years of being put down?
Yeah, those are great questions. I think in terms of the first part, sort of keeping that passion going, I think that's very, specific to maybe even the individual. But I think from a wider scope, right? I think the biggest way to keep that going is honestly to just stay engulfed in it, stay communicating with these people that are fighting alongside you, your people. Because I know, speaking from personal experience, the best way that I've sort of been able to reignite passion when I felt myself feeling, that fatigue or feeling disheartened, was to just talk about it with the activists that were working right by me. And just, I say it all the time, kind of my own reminder is to remember why you started. I think that's what even got me through grad school in the first place. But it's so important to just trace back and think, okay, why am I even doing this to begin with? Why did I start? What was the point? And I think even looking back at some of maybe the past campaigns that you've done, or seeing like, okay, well, when you did this, were you able to change at least one mind, or were you able to ignite some hope in some of your residents, because I think just reminding yourself of that is truly everything. And that's what's going to keep you going. And I'm happy to say that I think that a lot of youth today are very self-reflective in that sense, which is great to see. But I think there's a greater sense of like self-awareness that gets promoted there, and sort of like, okay, well, but just it feels hard now, but like look at how much has happened and how much change that you were able to bring about, is definitely empowering in itself. And to the second question, trying to sort of sway the pessimists or the more long-term generations, I would love to know the answer to that, because that has definitely been difficult. And I think actually one of the hardest things that we've had to deal with throughout, especially with so much, youth joining on. I think that it's one of the common frustrations that gets thrown out there, right? It's like, oh my God, I can't convince people. And I think the way to do it, or I guess personally speaking, the way that I've noticed like kind of has an impact is to not get angry about it, or kind of put that person down, because I know the instinct is to just kind of want to fight and be like, oh, but you're wrong, or what have you, is rather to just tell them that they deserve so much better than what they've been handed. And an argument that doesn't necessarily work for everyone if they don't have kids or what have you, but does work if they do, is to ask them like, well, what about your kids and then their kids? Don't you think they deserve better than this? Don't you want them to have better than this? Maybe if not for you, for them, or you could inspire them, right, to be able to want to make those changes. But I think absolutely taking it in a positive route rather than a negative route is always going to work far better in your favor. And I don't know, I personally love that argument of just like, you've been subjected to this forever and that makes it hard to see, but you deserve better this whole time, and we all have, and that's what we're fighting for.
Thank you. And thank you for your passion and taking it into a career. It's great, great example.
Thank you.
Do you think you could tell us a little bit more about like the specific actions that you've taken or outreach that you've engaged in to like get the community involved?
Yes, definitely. So there's a few that I can think of off the top of my head. I think one of my favorites that we've done have been something called visioning sessions, where essentially, you set up these events to, you start with the presentation of existing conditions and, okay, the developments we're working with now, and really opening it up to the public and saying, this is what we've got. What would you like to see, though? And just letting those ideas kind of travel throughout the room, bounce back off one another. I've noticed that residents have been especially receptive to those in particular, because people don't like to be told what they need, or like, hey, this is the best prescription for us, or what have you, right? Because I think when you're doing engagement, the best thing that you can do is to really just listen to other people and let other people speak. And I think it's a mistake that a lot of planners have kind of made in the past, is just simply, they won't even set foot into the neighborhood that they're planning for, or speaking to people and asking them what they want. So visioning sessions, absolutely, it's what they're typically called. And we've also done sort of the bigger things, right? The press conferences, depending on what sort of campaign we're undertaking, we'll go to that certain site, or if we're trying to get the attention of an elected official, we'll go to City Hall. And for those events, numbers are especially important. So having other organizations, show up and speak out, alerting the media, of course, is what those press releases are about. And that's also another avenue you can take, and it's very effective because of course people are watching, and they're watching the news, and they love to put that sort of stuff on Facebook and everything. I think that's one of the tactics that especially works for older generations for sure. What else? Oh, we've done tours of our community. Dr. Bryson is very familiar with those. He's taken many of his SUST courses, SUST students on those tours that we have of the Southeast side. And that's a great way to do outreach as well, because if you're offering those to just universities at large or to any large group, right? Then you're getting people outside of the community, aware of the sort of living conditions. And so often we'll have these groups come and say, like, I didn't even know this neighborhood existed, or I didn't know this was going on. So that's another avenue. Petitions are very old-fashioned, but still very effective, especially with change.org, right? But that's something that I've become very familiar with too in my work, is lots of petitions and circulating those, but also the fun events, right? Just everybody's favorites. Having movie nights, fundraisers of different sorts. We host a lot of like nature walks of our green spaces and things of that nature. And people are very receptive, because a lot of the times they'll see, like, okay, this event's going on and it's fun, I'm going to bring my family. But they don't necessarily know who's hosting the event. And then it just brings opportunity to be like, oh, hi, we're so-and-so, we organized this, we hosted this. And a lot of the times in those cases, we'll have families say, like, wow, like, you're right in my community and I had no idea. And, I complained to my husband all the time about the odors, and like, wow, there's actually someone out there doing something about it, and so those are just like a bunch off the top of my head that I can remember now. But yeah, hope that brings about some ideas. If that's
Yeah, that was very thorough. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yessenia, I wanted to jump in and ask you, since you brought up planning in many different ways during your presentation, and also noted how planning really needs to be more community-based and community-informed, maybe owned by the community rather than by only well-established professional planners that represent the ruling class, if you will. What plans would you recommend we read to kind of understand what a true community-based plan looks like and could function as? Do you have any that come to mind that maybe are focused on your area of the city, or something else that you've read?
Yeah, I would recommend, so if we're thinking of, I'd say, specific organizations, for example, Alliance of the Great Lakes, Calumet Connect, and CMAP, so the Metropolitan Alliance for Planning. I might be butchering their name there, but if you look up CMAP, CMAP, those plans will definitely come up as well. Voorhees Center, I can type that in the chat too here, because these are organizations that we've worked closely with, and they're definitely higher up in the ladder than grassroots organizations, but they prioritize working closely with grassroots organizations so that they're able to create plans that are very much based on community input. But those are, I believe you were looking for specific organizations or entities. I'm correct.
No, that's great. I was thinking about CMAP, but I am,
Mhm.
familiar with the Alliance and to a lesser extent Calumet Connect, and
Mhm.
those are great organizations to check out. And I like what you say about how um, they are not necessarily community based in their planning, but they
Yeah.
partner with and involve community organizations like CTEF in their work,
Mhm.
uh, which can be a good kind of connection, but bridge building between organizations of different scales.
Yeah.
Is it difficult for a small grassroots organization to do their own planning? Um, Maybe now that you're a planner, you might be hired, but it's for example, but it's probably difficult to do on thin resources. Is that correct?
Yeah, very. It's a big undertaking for sure. Because I think when I started off at SETF, that was sort of a constant complaint that would be brought up by the director, Peggy, and she'd always say like, God, I wish we had, a planner to help us out because I don't even know where to start. I don't know what they consist of. I don't, and coming fresh out of Roosevelt, I was like, oh, I have no idea either myself. And, you know, in my master's program, one of the the biggest required course that we have is the comprehensive planning course, and that's a semesters long undertaking where you're working with a whole class, so about you and 20 of your peers, on one plan for a specific township or community. When I took that course, we were given Melrose Park, but and it is so much work, and it's a whole lot of relying on other people to fact check and to go to other avenues for information, data collection, people that are good at graphics, people that are passionate about, community engagement, which was one of the elements that I took over, right, that I had a big hand in, was the community engagement portion. And then, oh man, then we have your environmental folks, your people that are good at making maps, because you're covering so much ground, you need that team. And so it is hard for grassroots organizations to cultivate their own plans. And so that's where I think, these sorts of larger scale organizations are very helpful in that sense. And I think the bright side is a lot of the time they will seek out organizations, right? A lot of these partnerships that we've formed oftentimes are because, Alliance for the Great Lakes reached out first, or the Voorhees Center reached out first, right? Because they want to know and they value that community input, but are a very handy resource because, yeah, long answer short is very difficult.
Any other questions from our audience for Yessenia?
Yeah, I have a comment. That was an excellent presentation. Very good. You touched on a couple things. And so did Professor Jones, that in the sustainability arena, it certainly seems to be generational, that the older someone is, the more closed-minded the more they are certain that a lot of this is made up. I've had, I'll say, discussions with parents of friends of mine, and so that makes them really old, that our agenda is political. Most of the stuff is made up. There's no climate change, there's no global warming, everything's fine, it's been like this forever. And yeah, their minds are made up. And I always default to I just follow the science. I follow the science behind it, and I stopped trying to change their mind. My efforts are spent elsewhere where I can make a difference. Your example of the pet coke piles over in Calumet area is a good example of environmental racism. Just the working class people who don't have money to hire attorneys to force them to put it somewhere else. And it's been there for a long time. And I'll speak to your intestinal fortitude for sticking this out. It's the one thing when I first got into the sustainability study program, it's overwhelming. It is, there are the problems that this world faces. It is easy to get overwhelmed and think, what's it all about? And then you just have to pick your battle, and make a difference where you can make a difference. And you certainly are. And one last thing, you touched on it a few times, that, politics works into this, and real permanent change is done through policy and voting, and vote the people in who want to make a difference. And it's a slow, cumbersome process. I work for a public sector wastewater treatment operation, and I see how slow the wheels can turn. And but yeah, eventually with enough push in the right direction, they do turn where the majority want them to turn. It takes a while, and it is frustrating, but I applaud you and and your stick-to-itiveness, and it is certainly generational. I love that all the young people that's what we need. We need people who've got skin in the game. Me and Dr. Bryson, and I won't say Carla, but yeah, I'll be okay. The next 30 years of my life, I'll see a little bit, but my kids, I got a 20-year-old, I got a 24-year-old. Boy, we really did a lot to screw this world up, and they got their hands full. But with that, thank you for your talk today.
Thank you so much for those comments. They are, yeah, absolutely spot on. I think especially to your point about, older generations, and I absolutely did try to put a more, positive spin on kind of trying to change those minds. But you're absolutely right about picking your battles, because there are some minds that you're just not going to be able to change. And, I think maybe to a certain degree if you want to try, but at one point when it's just not being fruitful, then you got to say, okay, you know what, I'm gonna focus on the people that are working with me, that or want to work with me, that want to see a change. And oftentimes that is youth, right? Because you're right, we're gonna be the ones living that reality and facing the repercussions of past actions. So yes, but thank you so much for your comment.
Just on a related note, I totally appreciate that perspective you shared, Dan, building on Yessenia's testimony. But I also thought that there are the rare and yet hugely significant exceptions to the rule of the older generations, and thinking about Peggy Salazar, who is retiring as longtime CTEF director. And Alicia, you were saying something just then. Go ahead.
Peggy already retired this
Yeah.
past year.
Yeah.
She did, and she deserves our thanks. Everyone in the Chicago region should thank her and people like her who have devoted decades to community empowerment and environmental activism and social justice work. Really, it's all. I love how people like Peggy and the organizations like CTEF illustrate how you don't have to worry about, oh, should I be a social justice warrior or an environmental activist? Because it's both, right? It's simultaneous. The same battles apply. We make things better for nature. We also make them better for human beings and make more livable and more safe communities. So it's exciting to pay tribute to and respect our elders and our icons who have come before us and built those foundations, but also applaud our young activists and planners like Yessenia Balcazar and like many of you who are passionate about these issues, or maybe you're just learning about them kind of for the first time. Either way, I'm so glad that we all could come together today and think about these issues and hear Yessenia's presentation about her journey through planning and her experiences in her own neighborhood. Gosh, I didn't mean to make a summative comment, but that's kind of what it sounded like. Just in case, does anybody else have a question since we're live broadcasting in Chicago? Anybody else want to throw in one last question or comment before we wrap things up today? How about we once again give our Zoom applause to our special guest, Yessenia Balcazar.
Thank you so much, everyone. It was very fun to do this, so thank you.
It was a great occasion and we really enjoyed hearing your talk, and I'm pleased that it seems to be recording well so we can share it afterward for anyone else who wants to see it. And thank you again, Yessenia.
Of course, anytime.